Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Bright Blue Ludgate Lecture. Our Ludgate Lectures is a series of events that we have monthly, and we invite high-profile thought leaders and decision makers to come and challenge us, to inspire us, to inform us. And it's named after our original headquarters at Ludgate Circus. Bright Blue, for those of you who don't know us, we're an independent think tank that seeks to defend and improve liberal society. This Ludgate lecture, we will be tweeting about it, so please use the hashtag #BrightBlue if you want to kind of amplify some of the analysis and thoughts that you have coming from the lecture. And you will be able to ask questions as well. So once our speaker has done their initial talk and we've had a bit of a Q&A between me and him, we'll then open it up to questions from you. And you can ask questions via the Slido link, which is just below the YouTube video that you are watching. And today's lecture is called Understanding and Reducing Economic Inactivity. And even though unemployment has been historically quite low in recent years, economic inactivity is relatively high and has been rising quite a lot since the pandemic. The economically inactive tends to involve the retired people looking after family or at home, students, and those who are long-term sick or disabled. And there's a big question about really whether we should be making more of those people who are economically inactive actually looking for work. And indeed, some of the evidence from the 90s and the noughties was that the economic growth that we enjoyed through that period, a good chunk of it was because of an increase in economic activity, whether that's through parental employment, immigrant employment, but also from older age employment. So really, we're trying to, in this lecture, understand what economic inactivity is and how we might go about reducing it. And we're joined by Professor Paul Gregg, CBE, who is currently at the University of Bath, where he is the director of the Centre for the Analysis of Social Policy. He's also recently been appointed by the Secretary of State for Department for Work and Pensions as the chair of their new Labour Market Advisory Board. He has for many decades been a very influential voice on employment and social mobility policy, and he previously led a major review of personalised support and conditionality in the welfare system for the DWP. So if I could invite you now, Paul, for your introductory remarks.
Right, okay. So what I'm going to start by doing is just sort of giving a flavour of how we got here. Yeah, what the kind of long-term trends have been around economic activity and inactivity, and then discuss the kind of recent change. And it has been quite dramatic, and that's the main focus of what I'll be talking about. But to start with, it sort of needs to be said that just before the pandemic, late 2018, early 2019, the UK had the highest employment rate, that is the proportion of working age population in work, had the highest employment rate it has ever had, or, at least since medieval times. And it had the lowest of economic inactivity. So something like 76% of the population was in work, and about 20% was economically inactive, and a small amount of unemployment. Over the long term, going back sort of 30, 40 years, the story of inactivity was that in the period of full employment, the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, economic inactivity was almost entirely made up of women who were looking after the family and the home. And that was the big sort of chunk, the vast majority of economic inactivity. And then since then, that has been declining. So more and more women have been working, moving into the labour market. And the big trend going the other way was students, right? Was that more and more young people were staying in full-time education, university and so on. And those two more or less offset each other, more or less, as long-term trends. And then in the 90s, sorry, the late 80s and the early 90s, there was, in the aftermath of the first and second recession of that period, a big rise in older workers being pushed out of the labour market, some retiring, others becoming claiming incapacity-related benefits for long-term health conditions. But that sort of stopped around 2000. And then we had this benign period of falling economic inactivity as employment rates rose and the sickness rolls, the numbers of people claiming sickness-related benefits, was in slow but steady decline. And that ran right through till 2018-19. And then just before the pandemic, it started to turn. And since, the pandemic, we've seen something like a little under 1 million extra economically inactive. Now, that's a big number. Yeah, and it's pushed the proportion from around 20% of the working age population to a little bit under 25%. So we've had this kind of big shift, right? And it's almost all, there's a little bit of increasing student numbers. There's a little bit of extra retirement, but not much. The big story has been this rise in people being inactive for long-term health problems. And this has become sort of highlighted only relatively recently in the last couple of years that this has been going on and has sort of sparked quite a large debate about what's the drivers here, what's the big stories, and what can we do about it. And there's kind of, let's just sort of pull that apart a little bit. And what we've seen is a couple of historically very surprising moves, is that big rises in economic inactivity for health reasons amongst the relatively young, that is under 35. Running alongside that, big increases in people being economically inactive for reasons of mental health, principally anxiety and depression. And those two overlap. Yeah, the young are disproportionately claiming sickness benefits and are claiming to be out of work because of long-term health problems, because of mental health conditions. And then on the other side, we've seen the raising of the state pension age. That's pulling older people into the working age population as the retirement age is pushed out. Good chunk of those people become economically inactive, some through retirement, but a lot turning up on sickness benefits. And there, it's less. It's not mental health so much. It's musculoskeletal. It's mobility. We've seen, very large rises over a long period of time of obesity and diabetes associated with diet. And these are the kind of big trends. Compared to other European nations, we are a sick nation. We have far higher rates of mental health problems, and we have far higher rates of obesity and diabetes than other countries. And this has come together, if you like, to form this kind of surge in economic inactivity. Just before I stop and we sort of go on to it, is that the story of economic inactivity for health reasons is not very many people start becoming economically inactive for health reasons. The numbers flowing in, if you like, starting the process are relatively small, but once it's started, it's incredibly long durations. Yeah, so that you get people there. Somebody told me recently is that 30% of those people who are currently economically inactivity for health reasons last worked under Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister, right? That gives us sort of a sense of the extremely long durations here. And to sort of scare myself as much as anything, given that pattern, if we've got a rising number of younger people under 35, including people in their early 20s, moving into sickness-related inactivity, they are potentially there for 40-odd years, yeah? And that creates a long-term pressure of rising caseloads, because what's happened recently is it's not the case that people who are sick and disabled are not moving back into work. The change has come about because we've seen rising numbers starting incapacity-related benefit claims. So it's all about the inflows. More people are starting to claim, and all the profile of the outflows is that they're not coming back, right? And indeed, generally, the flows back into employment after health-related issues are very low. Particularly those at older ages, they're far more likely to die or retire than they are to return to work. So we have this kind of pattern, and it's a very scary one, which is that people flow in here and very rarely return. And if you're making a very young cohort going through that kind of process, we are potentially writing off a section of society from the workplace and from employment and all that produces for them as individuals for really long, decades and decades. And that's very, very scary and is sort of driving the concerns now that we need to do something quite radical to try and change this. Okay, over to you. That was my opening spiel.
Great, thank you, Paul. That was super interesting. And really good to understand the kind of particular spike that we've seen since the pandemic in economic activity and what's driving that, the sort of cohorts of people. So I'm going to ask some questions now, and if you've got questions at home, just to remind you to ask questions via the Slido link, which is below your YouTube channel. So Bright Blue's done quite a lot of work comparing our social security system with international peers. And one thing we found was that in the short term, our replacement rate, i.e. the amount that we get from the benefit system relative to our previous salary when we fall out of work, the replacement rate in the short term is actually quite low relative to other countries. But in the long term, it seems to be quite high relative to other countries. And Denmark is often held up as an example of a country where the replacement rate is pretty high to begin with, and there's lots of support, back to work support. But that is for a time limited period. And then the kind of support, both financially and practically, comes away. And I'm just wondering whether you think the structure of our benefit system, and particularly the replacement rates, the way that they are designed is helpful for some of the trends that we're seeing in economic inactivity.
Right. So this is important, and there's quite a bit to this, so it's going to be quite a long answer. Our welfare system, as it sort of currently stands, more or less came to evolve in the late 80s, early 90s, and was designed to address the problems then, which was open unemployment. So what we had was a ramping up of conditionality. That is, that you were required to do certain activities to prove that you were looking for work. And if you failed to do so, that you were sanctioned. Okay. You had part or all of your benefits taken away. And it was progressively ramped up. So we have this kind of highly conditional system to force the unemployed to actively seek work and to return to employment. And we have had, through that, very low unemployment. As a model, it also has almost no supports, right? There's very, very little support systems, a lot of monitoring, but not a lot of support in order to try and help people back to work, right? And that profile, if you like, has succeeded for the unemployed, but it's pretty awful for the people who've got health-related problems. And it's awful in three sort of dimensions. The first is that the strong conditionality on the unemployed makes the disability benefits system a safe haven. It makes it a space where you're not hassled and threatened in the same kind of way. And what we saw was as that system ramped up in the late 80s and 90s, the increasing conditionality, lots of people moved back into work and away from unemployment, but a lot moved into incapacity-related benefits. It had a dual effect, if you like. It lowered unemployment, both by returns to employment and by getting more and more people into incapacity-related benefits. Okay, so the system has that kind of feature. The second is that the return to work, if you like, the financial incentives, the replacement rates, as you call it, uh, are poor here because partly because you get extra benefits if you're on incapacity relative to regular benefits. But also, if you're out of work for any period of time, the pay that you can return to is far lower. Yeah. So that typically when a person loses a job, the job they come back to is about 10% lower in terms of the earnings that you get, right? But it goes up by about another 10% if you're if out of work for a year, and another 10% if you're out for another 2 years. So if you've been out of work for 3 years or so, which a lot of the people on incapacity benefits are, the pay that you can get when you return is very low. Yeah. And very insecure and unstable. Yeah. It's very much concentrated in, if you like, the relatively unstable 0 hours contracts, temporary contracts, et cetera, kind of sector of the labour market, which makes accessing that kind of employment is often problematic for lots of people with health problems, particularly those with variable conditions and so on and so forth, right? And then the third sort of point around that is the absence of support. We have no coherent support system for helping the unemployed back to work. We don't sort of need one. It's all done through conditionality and monitoring their job search. But we equally have no coherent and active support system to try and help those on incapacity related benefits to return to work. Now, lots of other places, countries, and we have tried little programs, is that you have things around workplace adaptation. Yeah, you have condition management to try and help with the kind of deal with the conditions that the people face are dealing with. You have kind of work trials where you get people to test work in kind of safe ways to try and facilitate the return to work in a more regular form and so on and so forth. These are common structures, but we don't really have any of them. We have a bit of access to work. We have a few trials, things like Working Well and Work Well program, but fundamentally we have no integrated, coherent system to help the sick and disabled back to work. And just to sort of close that statement is that what we have, if you like, is a kind of a window of opportunity that before people turn up in incapacity benefit, there is a journey through sickness which leaves people out of, leaving the labour market, some through sick pay, others going straight off out of work, right? But there's a growing health problem. We do almost nothing to try and help people stay in work. Employers, the bigger ones tend to have some good practice, but small and medium-sized employers have no programs, no engagement, no support services to try and stop people leaving employment, right? And then on the other side, we have almost nothing to try and help people back to work. You leave work, you start claiming, there's an assessment period which can take up to 13 weeks. And so anything that we're trying to do is kicking in late, right? So we have a system effectively which does nothing when people are leaving employment, and anything that it starts to try and do to help people back is taking about a year to really kick in. Yeah. I mean, that's just crazy. Yeah. So we have no program to support people on the journey out, and we have no effective early engagement to try and bring them back. So that's why you have a system which is people don't return. Essentially, return is it's safe. There's little financial incentives, and there's no support system, and so lo and behold, the returns to work are incredibly low.
That's really interesting. And so what I'm getting from that is a kind of a better scenario would be that more people who are economically inactive at the moment actually either are in work or counted as unemployed. And when they're unemployed, becoming part of the system, the employment support system, but that being much better, work coaches doing much more, some of the things you said around Europe. So in my mind, it strikes me, actually, the unemployment figure that we have, which is quite low, is actually sort of masking, hiding some of the problems we have with economic inactivity. And a lot of those people should really be counted in the unemployment statistics, not only for, the sake of transparency, but for their sake as well, because they're more in the system, they're receiving employment support.
I mean,
So
it has been often said that the sick and disabled, or a lot of the sick and disabled, are sort of hidden unemployed. Yeah. But the definition of unemployment that we use is that you're currently, looking for work and able to start work, right? And that's clearly not being fulfilled, right? But so in a sense, they're not unemployed, but they should be viewed in a sense as potential labour market people. Yeah, this is potential rather than current unemployment. And as you said, it's totally right in the sense that when I was young, right, I used to work in factories and stuff before I went off to university and so on. And lots and lots of older men worked what was called light duties, right? That they stayed in employment in the firm, but didn't do the regular kind of full intensity work that the rest of the workforce did, right? That's sort of gone, right? And so we have employers wanting people who are, fully capable, fully ready to do the job when they are needed right now, kind of thing, right? And when people fall foul of that, there is little, too often, there is little emphasis within employers on trying to hold and retain people. It's rather to manage them out of the workforce, or to just let the process of sick pay carry on and go on. You do it for 6 months of sick pay, 28 weeks, and then you cease, the employment contract ceases. Yeah. And so we've got to fix that, right? We've got to have a system where the employer recognizes, in a sense, the need to hold on to what are valuable workers. Yeah, they are skilled and experienced workforce, right? But they can't do it on their own. And so we need, in many cases, bigger employers, yes, they can, but small and medium size, it's expensive. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go for that kind of help and support. The health service, which is kind of, tracking up at the seams right now, doesn't have the capacity to try and help people in those kind of circumstances too often, because they're not necessarily the most critically in need. But what we need, therefore, is a total rethink, if you like, around the journey out of the labour market as people become sick, right? And I envisage that is, a lot of what's going to happen in the next few years, is that ask of employers and the supports available to employers through the health service and elsewhere will be ramped up substantively, right? That's in a sense to try and stop the inflow, because if you don't stop the inflow, you're in really difficult times here, because people stay so long. And then on the other side is you need an activational package, yeah, which are bringing people closer to return to the labour market. Now, you called them unemployed. As I say, that doesn't actually necessarily meet the formal definition of unemployment, but we do need to increase some degree of economic activity amongst a large group of those people who are currently, in a sense, parked on long-term benefit receipt.
So I just want to move sort of up the age range towards older people. And you mentioned the kind of the increase in the state pension age,
Yeah,
in effect of driving some people into economic inactivity and some people into employment.
it's sort of reclassifying them from retired into inactivity. Yeah.
Yeah. So it strikes me that, people are living longer, which is a good thing. And a lot of the fiscal projections that you're seeing, for example, the OBR saying that our net public sector debt ratio could reach sort of 300% of GDP by nearly 2050. A lot of that seems to be driven by an aging population and the costs of pensions and health, which is majoritively consumed by older people. So it strikes me that we need to think a bit more seriously about getting people not only in their 50s, but also well into their 60s, up until 70, working. And I'm just wondering what levers you think might be possible to bring a lot more of those people across the income spectrum, because you're talking about a state pension age, but there's also the age in which you can access your private pension
Private
pot.
personal pensions, yeah.
Yeah, which is mid 50s going up to 57. So there's lots of people actually in, very high income jobs who are probably retiring quite early. Um, so just interested how much potential you think there is in terms of economic activity from older people in their 50s and 60s, and what sort of levers you think we can pull to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so the state pension age has risen to 66, so it's bringing people aged 65 into the supposedly active workforce, labour force, but only around a bit over 30% actually work. Yeah. So we have something around 70% who are not working, who are now below, they are technically in a sense of working age because they're below the state pension age. Yeah. And it's about to go to 66. Yeah. So the 66s are going to be brought in, which is me, right? So I'm going to retire, and I can't retire until I'm well into my 66th year because the state pension age is moving up again. And again, there the employment rate is a little bit lower again. Yeah, so it's a bit under 30% currently, right? As the state pension age rises, there will be some shift in behaviour. But fundamentally, we're pushing up the state pension age in order to save money, as you're saying. But the vast majority don't continue working. Yeah, and some retire. About half of that population are retired. Yeah, and about half of the non-working are claiming sickness and disability benefits, and that is part of the rise that we've seen recently. Is that the state pension age has been pushed up, and that pulls people in. So yes, we need to think about how we promote sort of active working lives with aging, right? And there's kind of three parts to that, really. One is there's the health side. Yeah, I mean, as you get old, and I'm kind of, gee, I know this, right? As I get old, the body starts malfunctioning in various ways, right? And it gets harder to work, right? It gets harder to maintain, full-time regular employment. Yeah. And so lots of people start drifting out of the labour market. And the people who do it most are those who do more physical employment. Yeah. So, old gits who sit behind computers and pontificate can work on quite late. Yeah. But people who are working in factories, retail, shop floor, even people working in things like social care, where there's a lot of lifting and all of that kind of stuff, people, it becomes hard, right? And people drift out of the labour market. So we need to work out much more effectively how to, two parts to that. There's two parts to that. One is, what can we do to try and reduce the deterioration of health as people age? Yeah. So what can we do to maintain a healthy working lives, to use the phrase? The second is that in the employment that people are in, are there ways to manage it so that they can continue working what they did previously? And more often, what can they be done to move into different roles? Yeah, which are less physically onerous and therefore potentially can be continued. Right now, that's what I used to have just called light duties. Yeah, it's doing different roles which are less intense, and that used to happen, but we've kind of lost it. Yeah, and we need to recreate that kind of thing. And now sometimes that will be within the same firm. In other cases, it will mean a change of job. Yeah, change of employer. And so we then need to look at how you retrain, if you like, or re-enable people to take on different roles. Yeah. So, people say, well, isn't it great with all this home working? Yeah. Lots of people who, potentially sick and disabled can work from home. The vast bulk of those who are drifting into incapacity rated benefits are not in roles that you can do home working in. Yeah. Nor do they have a skill set that facilitates home kind of working, right? That's for people like me. Okay. So that's two parts to it, and the third part to it is the financial stuff. Yeah, is what are the financial incentives to keep working? Yeah. Now, most so there's two things going on here which are sort of interesting. Most uh, defined benefit pension systems have shifted the incentives against retiring at around 60. Yeah. They've changed the rules a bit. So the penalties for retiring early, i.e., at 60, early 60s, have been increased, right? And to encourage people to go through. But currently, that still stops at 65, right? There are incentives to work beyond that, but there are no penalties. The expected retirement age for most personal pensions is still 65, and all the incentives are around that kind of date. Yeah. So one is, what can we do around the kind of financial incentives within that? The other is those kind of defined benefit schemes are on the way out. Yeah. And then we're moving to defined contribution systems. Yeah. Which will be much less generous. Yeah. So there will be a natural process by which as people start more and more relying on DC pensions, the incentive to continue working is going to ramp up. Yeah, because you aren't guaranteed a proportion of your salary. It's according to what your pension pot has been over, that's built up over your working lives and stuff. And lots of people will be coming in with much less generous pension opportunities, and so the incentives to keep working will rise. So part of it is, there's pressure going that kind of way anyway, but then we need to look at how we incentivize people not to retire early and to continue working. And I personally feel that personal pensions need to have a rising of the personal pension age, not just the state pension age, in a sense. Yeah, the target retirement age needs to start kicking up from 65 to 67 or so. Okay.
Great. Let's sort of go down the age range back to younger people under the age of 35. Sadly,
Yeah.
I'm just over that. Um, but thinking about the rise, particularly in economic inactivity, there's been a lot of concentration amongst young people and them exhibiting internalizing mental health disorders as being part of that. Jonathan Haidt has written quite a lot about this, the American academic, and he's written a book called The Anxious Generation, which looks at the impact of social media in particular on girls, but on young people generally, what you might call Generation Z, having more anxiety and depression. And so that's one theory, that social media is really spiking this. Some people who are a bit more cynical think about concept creep, that everyday worries have become over medicalized. There's been a sort of, an overemphasis on medicalizing everyday worries, and that is leading to some bad effects in terms of engagement with the labour market. So I'm just interested in what you think might be driving that increase in mental health problems, which is leading to withdrawal from the labour market amongst young people.
Yeah, and just to sort of emphasize a lot of it's not withdrawal from the labour market. It's never going there in the first place. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people coming straight out of education and going into incapacity, or not working initially. I mean, they're going NEET, yeah, not in employment, education, or training. And then after a period of that, they're drifting towards incapacity-related benefits, health-related incapacity. And as I said, that's very scary in terms of, those kind of ages are the ages where you start gaining the skills and experience which allow you to gain higher earnings, and get the age earnings profile as you sort of move up towards higher earnings. So these people, even if we're getting them back, are having really long, serious damage done to their earnings potential because they're missing out on all of that kind of skills and experience, which is so essential for young people to progress in the labour market. I mean, it did turn just before COVID, but it really kicked off through lockdowns. Yeah, there's clearly a lockdown effect going on here. Now it's continuing afterwards, but it really kicked off, and I can't believe that's coincidence. Yeah, I mean, social media didn't start in 2020. Yeah, and kids, engaging with it didn't start in 2020. So I think there's the lockdown, the social isolation clearly has some part of it. And I think, and I've got absolutely no medical nous on this kind of space, right? No idea whatsoever. I'm old, for Christ's sake. I don't even use social media. Um, um, but there does feel that social isolation is not just about lockdown, that there is kind of a sort of a different form of socialization. You interact with people online less and less face to face. And in lots of ways, that's good. It means you keep in touch with people who you would otherwise lose touch with. But there is a sort of a loss of a lack of socialization. Maybe that's what's going on. It is anxiety. I wouldn't think I would be deeply skeptical to say that it's just because we're sort of accepting terminology and it's not a real kind of phenomenon, because it's not universal. It's happening here, but it's not happening in other countries. That's another kind of issue in the sense in terms of social media. I really don't know whether our social media usage is massively up on, your Denmarks and your France and what have you, who aren't seeing this, right? We are pretty much unique in this kind of space. So there's something, going wrong, and I can't tell you exactly what it is, but there's something about our childhood, perhaps later childhood, teenage years, which has gone wrong. The school system may not be helping. Intense pressure about exams and working, exam pressures, but something's going deeply wrong. And I don't really want to over pontificate on that because I really don't have any expertise. But what we can say on the other side is our child adolescent mental health services and our early adult mental health services are truly, truly desperate. Yeah, they're in a desperate state. Yeah, and so in a sense, going back to that kind of story before, we don't have an effective intervention system to try and help people stay within the labour market or join the labour market. We don't have the condition management tools in place to try and help young people arrive in the labour market kind of ready. And for those people with significant mental health related problems, we don't have a good system for helping them navigate that and work with it. These kind of health conditions shouldn't preclude employment, but it's not easy. And employers need to be sensitive to it. You need supports to try and navigate it. We don't have anything like that here yet. And I say yet because I really do believe this is coming. Yeah. And I think that schools the pressure on schools to worry about youth adolescent mental health is going to ramp up massively as well, because in a sense it's a new crisis, if you like. It's really only emerged in the last 4 or 5 years. And so it's taken some time, but I think everybody's kind of recognizing in it and will start to seriously engage with it.
Yeah, I mean, for clarification, my understanding of the evidence is across the Western world, there has been an increase in anxiety and depression. But I think what you're saying is that what's particularly unique about the UK is that that is showing up in the economic inactivity.
And claiming health related inactivity benefits. Yeah. Yes. You're right. I'm not saying that we are unique in terms of anxieties and so on, but we are doing very badly in trying to hold people in employment and to connect them with work when those kind of conditions are being experienced.
Yeah, understood. Okay, my final question before I open it up to some questions from the floor is, and you touched upon this in your last comment around working from home, which has obviously become a lot more normalized since the pandemic. Yeah. And hybrid working, I think, is probably much more common now than being full-time in an office, which is a massive change since the pandemic. And I'm just interested in that because for a long time before the pandemic, the idea of working from home was seen by a lot of progressive policymakers of including people who had caring responsibilities or disabilities more being engaged in the workplace, which I think is right. But I think increasingly a lot of people are realizing that if everything is working from home, then young people in particular are not getting the benefits of socialization, of learning from peers, and there's a kind of social isolation effect. So
Yeah.
working from home is no longer just in the progressive policymaker bucket. People are also seeing that being in an office brings benefits in terms of socialization, social integration, meeting people from different backgrounds. So the office, in some ways, is a force for good. And I'm just wondering whether you had any
Well,
thoughts.
I mean, what I would say, and you kind of touched on it, is that for young people, uh, you know, the crucial experience in the labour market is gaining the skills and experiences to lead on to kind of higher status jobs, promotions within firms, or moving to other employers and going on that kind of age earnings profile. If you're working from home, if you are own account, self-employed, digital nomad, to use the phrase, working from home and so on, that I think there's growing evidence that stunts, if you like, the trajectories. Yeah, because part of the learning experience is being in an environment where you're interacting with and learning from the people who are already doing the higher status jobs and so on. So the promotion, career development and so on is being slowed down for young people. And I feel, and it's partly working from home, it's partly temporary contracts, which are increasingly common amongst the young, 0 hours contracts, own account, self-employment. All of these things are not very supportive of those kind of career age earnings development and that leaves sort of young people, sort of delayed, I guess is the word. Yeah, people, Generation Z. I think maybe we should think of them a bit as the delayed generation. The sort of the development of and it's not just in the work environment, in other spaces too, home ownership and many other kind of spaces, that the young people are not getting there as young as they used to, in terms of that kind of higher earnings, owner occupation, even cohabiting and partnering and so on. It's all happening later.
Yes,
Okay.
but they'll be working much later as well.
Well, I guess they will. I guess they're going to have to, for Christ's sake, because there's going to be no pensions for them. Right.
Interestingly, there is an RCT that I saw from Stanford, which looked at Chinese call center workers, compared those at home and those working in an office. And most people from work from home had equal, if not better, productivity, work satisfaction and retention. But the thing that they really suffered from was they were less likely to be promoted. So just,
Yes.
there's strong evidence supporting what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring in some questions now from the audience. So John Pring from Disability News Service has asked, I hear emphasis on pushing sick, disabled people towards work, but none on safeguarding. What about the disastrous impact of the similar push in the 2010s?
I'm not. Uh, let's think what push means here. We're going to have a lot. We've got a lot of people. Long term, being out of work is extremely damaging to people. It's often damage to their health, and it's certainly damaging to their earnings capacity and living standards. Yeah, and if you're young, then that's really extreme in terms of the damage it does. But that doesn't mean that you're forcing people to work. Yeah, there's a game here which is around sort of an integrated package around engaging people in terms of thinking about work, offering supports in terms of workplace, offering supports in terms of health conditions, and connecting people with employers who are potentially sympathetic enough to accommodate people with health conditions. I think, there's kind of always been two narratives here. One is around, pressure and the government using conditionality. You may not have heard it, but I'm talking ramping down conditionality here, right? Conditionality is part of the problem we have here. Yeah. So I'm not wanting to say that what we're doing is going to move lots of sick and disabled people into a highly conditional sanctioning kind of welfare system. That's totally not what I think needs to go on. In fact, the sanctioning conditionality system is part of the problem here. It's definitely not part of the solution. So we need to rethink welfare in terms of that intense pressure and so on and so forth. Yes, safeguarding. Yes, there needs to be some. There needs to be fast tracking so people can be, put into places which is, appropriate for the health conditions they have. But we need to develop a system that's built around the needs, capabilities, and desires of the individual, not waving a big stick.
Okay. Jonathan Payne has asked, could third sector organizations with established relational approaches to employability support be the answer?
Yes. I think we're almost certainly going to be looking for kind of welfare to work providers with knowledge and experience of the communities that we're talking about. Yes. Now we have experience with that. Mental health sector, there's been a lot of experience where the charities have been part of of running some of the programs and so on that have tried to help, particularly around mental health. I think I said that. So yes, that needs to be part of the story. There's a tension here, which is that part of the interventions that we need to be looking at need to be dealing with health related issues. So you need medically trained people as well. Yeah, that it's not just a caseworker, who's trying to sort of talk to you about returning to work. We need things which are medically sensitive, going back to the safeguarding. So we need trained personnel that may not currently exist within the charitable sector in many cases. So we need to put together. I've mentally at this stage, and it's pretty early days, is that thinking that we kind of need sort of hybrid organisations which are bringing together charities, health professionals, advice and workers and employer engaged people engaged in engaging employers. We've got to bring all of these together because we've tried lots of these different things in separate, often randomly distributed across the country at various times. We've never seriously put it all together into one kind of space. But doing so requires something new which we haven't done before, and there's some learning to be done there. But charities are going to be part of it. Yeah.
A person called Ben has said, what role could technology and automation play in this area, both in contributing to economic inactivity, but also in alleviating it in the future? This is a really good question, actually, because for a long time, people have been, it's a tough one, yeah, but it's also, which is, a long time people have been predicting, haven't they, that technology, whether it's automation in the 2010s or AI in the 2020s, will lead to mass redundancy. But here we are with, record levels of employment, record levels of low levels of unemployment. So just interesting what your thoughts are on tech, which is ever evolving in terms of how it will shape employment and economic inactivity.
Okay, so I mean, it's worth sort of thinking what tech did last time we had, a big sort of tech shift, if you like, and the sort of the big story, one of the big stories of the 80s and 90s was that the kind of the middle hollowed out, the kind of middle level skilled kind of jobs started disappearing, and you had increasing demand for high level skills and higher education and big expansion of degrees and so on, and an expansion of the kind of the service sectors at the other end. And widening inequality as part of that, because it was pulling in two directions. The current generation of tech is pushing up the skill distribution. Yeah, that it's potential to, take on, law, medicine, a whole range of kind of what have traditionally been higher tech jobs, higher skilled jobs. And indeed, that's where the incentives are for providers of AI to innovate, because that's where potential big money is, in reducing lawyers doing sort of more, house conveyancing and so on, routine stuff. Okay, so I think we have to sort of recognize that we're going to see a shift again in what employment looks like for people. What kind of employment is out there, right? And I suspect that it's that the routine higher end stuff is going to disappear, and that again will tend to push us towards more kind of caring related services and so on. I mean, you're dead right that so far it doesn't create mass worklessness. It changes the nature of work that is being done. But the kind of risk here, I think, at the moment is not so much mass worklessness. It's that we continue to expand, if you like, the kind of service, face-to-face, customer-facing kind of jobs, caring and so on, and losing a lot of the higher end stuff to AI. Apart from the very, very, very top, where people continue to make the kind of big decisions and so on. So I feel, again, we're going to see a widening of inequality rather than mass unemployment. We're going to have the elite who are very, very who benefit a lot from this kind of high end artificial intelligence, and most of us in the future will be doing fairly low routine kind of jobs, customer facing service sector jobs. And I think that needs to change our kind of, we need to it has lots of implications. It has implications for inequality, therefore it has implications for how we tax and so on. People talk about a citizen's income, universal basic income kind of thing. I think if down the line that pressure might rise, that we, in a sense, we need to support earnings at the bottom end of the distribution, and quite a large part of the distribution, through income supports, whilst taxing artificial intelligence and the earnings of the very very wealthy beneficiaries of that. That is bloody hard to do. I think every conversation we have is, how do we tax wealth? How do we tax high earning dividends and high earning individuals? It's really, really tough to get that practically to happen. But in a sense, it feels as though it kind of has to happen.
Well, I think the Labour government is probably grappling with that in advance.
Well, yeah, and is being shouted at all the time for doing so.
Interesting. What people say about AI is, well, I suppose two things. You kind of got the cultural preference for people to work more flexibly at home, their own hours rather than the strict 9 to 5. But then you've got the kind of technological stuff, which allows people to work from home. And a lot of people are saying, actually, we might see a rise in self-employment and one-man bands. So at the high end, you've got people who, are creators, have got particularly high-profile reputation, don't need to hire lots of people, can use technology and AI to do that. So that kind of points to what you're saying about increased inequality. But the technological advances also means that people are more isolated in their work. So basically, you're getting more atomization of the labor market. Do you worry about that?
I mean, I think there's lots of worries around a rise. I mean, which isn't currently happening actually, of own account self-employed in the lower skilled sectors. I mean, if you're high end consultant, whatever, people are doing well. But the low end, is little progression, which we touched on before, little capacity for savings, no lack of sick pay, lack of holiday pay, and so on and so forth. So there is own account self-employed amongst the low skilled at the moment is not looking good. The earnings in that sector have fallen a lot since COVID kicked in. Yeah, so the earnings of own account self-employed have fallen a lot in that period. So I think we need to worry about that, seriously. Yeah. It's also taxation in that space is problematic too. Yeah. So I think we should be worried. But as I said, we should note again that we aren't seeing an explosion of own account self-employed right now. Yeah, it happened. Happened a decade ago now, but it isn't happening right now. But I do worry about what that experience is leading people to and where it takes them in the future, because it isn't always a good place.
Okay, and then just final questions. Two anonymous people have asked. The first question is, how much of the increase of the 1 million in long-term sick is it believed to be down to long COVID? Uh, so that's the first question. And the second question is, why are we so much sicker than other European countries?
Yeah, well, so the first one, it's small. Long COVID, I mean, it's there, but it's not huge in the numbers that we're talking about. I think the COVID effects are more around mental health rather than long COVID physical health. I think that's kind of where we need to think about what that did to us. Right. And why are we sicker? Yeah, that's a good question. Right. We consume loads more processed foods and sugar. Our diets are very much heavier than that. Not America. They do, they're like us, or we're like them. But compared to European countries and East Asian countries, our diets are very unhealthy. And I think that needs to be noted and should be looked at and addressed or challenged. But the other side, the kind of the mental health stuff, as you sort of said, it does feel that this is more general, but it's our treatment system is not, we're not working with it right. Yeah, we're not coping with it in the same way as other countries. So anxiety and depression and mental health services are not helping people effectively, which other countries seem to be doing better than us. So that it's there, but it's not as damaging. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it's not as damaging.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone who's been watching. It's been really fascinating. I've learned a load. And I hope that you are successful in your role as chair of the Labour Market Advisory Group in giving good analysis and ideas to the Secretary of State so we can see more progress on bringing down economic inactivity. So we wish you well with that. And we've done lots of work at Bright Blue on this sort of thing. So we hope we can feed in ideas to you at the group too. Just to say, we have a paper coming out next week on how we can reform NHS funding to empower ICBs, integrated care boards, more and focus a lot more spending on prevention, which I think Paul
Yeah,
was
no, that's totally, absolutely.
So we've got a paper coming out next week, so please do watch out for that. And then secondly, the next Ludgate Lecture in November is with Amanda Spellman, who was the Chief Inspector for Ofsted. So please do join us for that if you're interested in joining us again for another Ludgate Lecture. So I'll just end by saying a big thanks to Paul. If there's a kind of virtual round of applause, there it was. We're very grateful for your time. And we wish you all the best in your job at the DWP on the Labour Market Advisory Group. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody else. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was